Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
He's back as he is every Wednesday. Dr. Nick Waddy, Alfred State history professor.
It's always an honor and a pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me.
And first question is about what they're calling the Wexit up in Canada, the western end of Canada, considering having a vote to possibly break away from Justin Trudeau's government. Do you have any thoughts there, Dr. Waddy?
Well, I think the chances of that happening, Brian, are slim to none. I think it is true that there are some major cultural differences between some of the western provinces in Canada and perhaps what's going on in Ontario and Quebec and the Maritime provinces. And it is also true that the Conservatives won the popular vote because they finished so strongly in those western provinces and obviously lost out in Ontario, the Maritimes, and elsewhere. But I think there's a simple remedy to that problem, and that is, the Liberals won the election, but they have a minority government, and sooner or later there's going to be another election, and there's every prospect that the Conservatives will win it. So I think the people who are frustrated about Justin Trudeau in Canada just need a little patience.
Dr. Waddy, moving on to what's going on over in England. This is a little YouTube of Dr. Waddy's favorite British politician. It's the Nigel Farage show here, and the title of this is Are the Remainer MPs Holding England Hostage Over Brexit? Here's what Nigel Farage said there.
And their idea is that rather than going through the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, a simple bill would be introduced. They're specifying the 9th of December, and they're saying they're happy to have an election, but not on Boris Johnson's terms. But I wonder overall, does Boris actually have a point? Is our democracy, is our whole governmental process being held hostage by MPs who simply don't want Brexit to happen? So I'm very keen this morning to hear from you. If you're a Lib Dem supporter, an SNP supporter, a Green supporter, a Labour supporter, respond to that jibe from Boris. He says that the men and women representing you are holding the country hostage over Brexit. Tell me, does Boris have a point, or is he wrong? And if he is, please tell me why. Well, joining me to talk about this, and in particular, Labour's position, which is, well, I think confusing for most people, is John McTiernan, former Director of Political Operations, of course, for Tony Blair. John, good morning.
Good morning.
Do the public, are they going to sympathise with Boris when he says that we're being held hostage?
Well, I think the problem for Boris is he looks impotent, and that's because he is impotent. He sits there, having inherited a very slim majority in the House of Commons. He then expelled his own Conservatives, including the grandson of Churchill, and then he alienated the DUP. So,
Dr. Waddy, your thoughts there?
Well, Brian, it's the experts heaping contempt on Boris Johnson as usual. You can just detect the contempt and the hatred in his voice there. But of course, Boris Johnson does have a point, and that is that for a long time he's wanted an election to give the British people an opportunity to clarify their position on Brexit and to give him, Boris Johnson, a good Conservative majority in Parliament so he can push through his own deal. And the opposition parties, including and some rebel Conservatives, have frustrated those efforts. But it looks, Brian, as though an election is finally coming to pass. Labour has come around, and I think we're probably going to see an election in December. And all the polls pretty much unanimously put the Conservatives not only ahead, but decisively ahead. So there's every prospect that Boris Johnson will be vindicated, and the experts, of course, will be seething about it. Now, the tragedy, from my perspective, is that Nigel Farage, who I greatly admire, and Boris Johnson, who I greatly admire, are not going to be playing on the same team. It looks like Nigel Farage has rejected Boris Johnson's deal with the EU. But I think even without Nigel Farage's help and support, Boris Johnson can and will win this election. and there will be Brexit.
You know, reading the comments, Dr. Waddy, it's kind of, well, I guess I would compare it to a lot of some of the comments I see to comments I've seen on USA news pages. For example, this is one of the comments off the side of the YouTube. It's of the Nigel Farage show. And this is, from someone in England, and it says, we need IDs. That would solve many issues, including voter fraud and finding who is here illegally. Now, that's something that you hear quite a bit over here from people like, Tucker Carlson on Fox News.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right, Brian. A lot of the same issues that we see in U.S. elections replicate themselves overseas. That's certainly true. But part of the debate over this election will actually be over the issue of whether non-UK citizens, in other words, EU nationals who are living in Britain, get to vote. A lot of the parties want to expand the electorate to include 16 and 17-year-olds and also foreigners who are living in Britain.
On that topic, Dr. Waddy, I'm just seeing another comment. We stop paying benefits for any illegals in any business that employs them. Should be fined over 250,000 quid. Again, that's the kind of thing that you might hear from, I'm not sure Tucker would go that far, but you would definitely see it as a comment on a news page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have the same problem with illegal immigration in Europe that we have in the United States, not on the same scale. I mean, we have something like 11, 12, 20 million illegal immigrants, and frankly, President Trump has left most of them alone. There are quite a few people who are frustrated by the fact that we don't go after employers more, because that's would seem to be the only way that we can truly deal with the problem of illegal immigration, is to take away the pull factor of jobs.
Yeah, and again, on the immigration issue, talking about big business, the commenter said they want them here so that they have employment slaves. I take that to mean so they can pay them cheaply inexpensively under the table. Again, that's the kind of thing you hear over here.
Absolutely, yeah, you're right. And as we've talked about on this show, a lot of the sort of poisonous, highly personal, vitriolic attacks that we're seeing in American politics now, and the great hatreds that we're seeing, right versus left, are also replicating themselves in British politics and in European politics more generally. So there's a crisis of democracy. The basic legitimacy of our institutions is being challenged, not only in the United States, but all throughout the Western world. And this is scary stuff, Brian.
Now, to quote another one of your favorites there, Dr. Waddy, here's Pat Buchanan saying that Sunday morning, President Trump announced that the world's worst terrorist, the head of ISIS, had received justice. The long search for the sadistic fanatic had ended in triumph. No U.S. troops were lost. That would be a big thing with Pat Buchanan. And he goes on to say, left out of the loop was the chairman of House Intelligence, Adam Schiff, one of the Gang of Eight, who's almost always given a heads up about major military operations. And Buchanan goes on to say that Saturday's Washington Post describes the mindset that is taking hold in Washington, D.C., as using an example of the Extinction Rebellion's group dragging a boat into the street at 16th and K Streets to block traffic for all hours to call attention to rising sea levels. Blocking traffic may only be the beginning, says the Washington Post. Dr. Waddy, your response to what Buchanan says?
Well, it was amazing, Brian, how the left and the media tried to distort the story of al-Baghdadi's death to somehow make President Trump look bad. And they really got creative in this case, and I suppose you'd have to. But the truth is that the destruction of ISIS and now the death of ISIS's leader is a great victory for the United States and a great victory for the civilized world. And truly, it's a great victory for Islam, too, because there's never been an organization that blackened the name of Islam and of the Arab world more effectively than ISIS did. So everybody should be celebrating what just happened in Syria.
Dr. Waddy, Congressman Adam Schiff, secret court continues with impeachment witnesses, and the leaks continue. The complaints continue from the Republicans that they're not allowed to cross-examine or question anybody, and that the whole impeachment inquiry is not an official impeachment inquiry, which I don't know how you can doubt that, because tomorrow Nancy Pelosi is having a vote on impeachment. Your thoughts, Dr. Waddy?
Right, Brian. This is a major development because for the first time, the full House will be expressing itself in some fashion on the question of impeachment. But once again, the Democrats are fudging things. They're not having an official, formal vote to open an impeachment inquiry. They're sort of setting up some ground rules, but they're not requiring vulnerable Democrats in the House to go out on a limb and say, I want to open a formal impeachment inquiry. They're not doing what was done in 1973, and they're not doing what was done in 1998, and that's by design. So they're continuing to construct this whole investigation in a very careful way so as to maximize their ability to disseminate and to leak information harmful to President Trump. They're choosing their witnesses very carefully. And I think they're trying to keep control of the media narrative to create this certainty that, of course, Trump is guilty to justify what they hope will eventually be the passage of articles of impeachment. But, at the end of the day, there are some key points which they haven't proven. They certainly haven't proven a quid pro quo, and they also haven't proven that Donald Trump's motivation in asking Ukraine to look into something was solely to meddle with the results or potential results of the 2020 election. They have no evidence at all of that. That part of their case is simply assumed. So there are some major holes in their case, and I think they're hoping to fudge all of that and to go full steam ahead, hope that nobody notices all the weaknesses in their case. And I think gradually this whole impeachment thing is going off the rails.
Talking to Dr. Nick Waddy, Alfred State European history professor. What do you think? Do you think the Democrats will keep this going until the 2020 election? I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Well, what I've read is that they want to wrap this thing up by the time Democrats start voting in their own nomination process. So the Iowa caucuses are at the beginning of February, so I guess they want to get things done by then. They see things moving from sort of the private phase of hearings in secret to more public phase relatively soon. But I've described this as a trial balloon before, and I don't think it's inevitable that they will pass articles of impeachment out of the Judiciary Committee or have the whole House vote on impeachment. I think they're still waiting to see how this plays. There's still months to go in this process, and Republicans are finally starting to get their act together and really pushing back in some cases in an effective way. So
I tend to think that's because of both Trump and pressure from Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity. Your thoughts? That's
part of it, yeah. The conservative movement is organizing. President Trump, of course, is always a very vigorous voice in his own defense. But I read an article today that said that the Republicans in the Senate started to get together to pass a resolution to criticize some key flaws in the House process. And the House is sort of preemptively passing its own resolution to ensure some degree of fairness in the process. So clearly the Democrats in the House are sensitive to these criticisms that they're not giving President Trump a legitimate opportunity to defend himself. So, these are early days, Brian, and I don't think, so many people have said impeachment is in the bag. President Trump will be impeached, and perhaps his goose is cooked. It is premature to say anything like that.
We're going to take a quick break. We're talking with Dr. Nick Waddy this morning, and when we come back, we'll talk about a couple of things. Rand Paul and his attempts to get spending cuts passed, which it did not. We'll also talk about the Democrats and their campaign for the White House in 2020. Stay with us.
Know where you can find all your favorite Skechers shoes in one place? Skechers.com. Because at Skechers.com, we have miles and miles of styles of the most comfortable shoes on the planet. We have boys and girls shoes that sparkle and light up. Skechers.com has work shoes, slip-ons, sports shoes, casual shoes, canvas shoes, go walk, go run. The styles are endless. And on Skechers.com, you can find all the fits you need. Plus, so many shoes with Skechers exclusive air-cooled memory foam. So find all the styles, all the fits, and all the comfort. Only at Skechers.com.
Checking in with meteorologist Rob Carolyn, who says a big storm's on the way.
Yes, it is, and just in time, unfortunately, Brian, for Halloween. It's going to cause some big problems for the trick-or-treaters tomorrow and into tomorrow evening. Low pressure is in the process of developing in the lower Mississippi River Valley. It's going to head towards Lake Erie. That storm is going to bring lots of warm, moist air up from the south. It's also going to be accompanied by some fairly strong winds because we've got temperatures in the 70s out ahead of the storm in the Tennessee River Valley and well below zero in parts of Wyoming this morning. Cloudy skies today. A couple of showers may cross the area. Temperatures are going to be near 60. Sunrise was at 7:42 this morning. It'll set tonight at 6:06. Clouds, scattered showers, and 50 to 55 through the overnight. Tomorrow, rainy and becoming breezy. Mild, highs near 65. Rainy, windy, turning colder tomorrow night, lows 40 to 45. Showers end very early Friday, otherwise mostly cloudy, windy, and cool for Friday, 45 to 50. Brian, we're likely to spend time over the weekend with some sunshine and temperatures only in the 40s.
Back with Alfred State History Professor Dr. Nick Waddy. Dr. Waddy, let's sum it up. Who are we looking at as far as your predictions go? We look at Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden. Who's going to be the Democrats' candidate?
Well, Brian, the polls, especially in the early states, currently favor Elizabeth Warren. She's had a lot of the momentum. The betting markets favor Elizabeth Warren for what that's worth. And, I'll be honest with you, I'm an optimist, and I tend to think things will work out the way I want them to. And I want Elizabeth Warren to be the nominee because I think she's a disaster in the making. And I have faith in the Democrats. I think they usually choose wrongly, and I think they will this time too. So my money's on Elizabeth Warren, but I don't count Biden out because I see that in some ways the Democratic establishment is nervous about Elizabeth Warren. Frankly, the best thing that Joe Biden has going for him, certainly not Joe Biden, it's Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders' campaign still has a lot of life, and he's essentially stealing votes from Elizabeth Warren. So that's really Biden's only path to victory, I think, is a divided field.
What about this news that Senator Rand Paul proposed $500 billion in annual spending cuts, not just one time, but annual spending cuts, and the Senate voted against it?
Yeah, good for Rand Paul. I mean, he's a great American, a great patriot. I share so many of his principles and his values, and he's absolutely right. You see so many articles about the budget deficit. It has spiked to $1 trillion a year, and that is totally unacceptable, especially in a time of economic prosperity. But the articles always suggest that it's Trump's fault because of his tax cut. But the truth is, tax revenues are up. But what is up even more, much more, is spending. Spending is out of control. And Rand Paul is right that we need to look at spending cuts across the board, really. Everything has to be on the table. And we can put it off, and we have put it off for decades, and we probably will put it off for perhaps a few more decades. But sooner or later, this country is going to have to learn to live within its means. And at that point, certainly the Rand Pauls of the world will be vindicated.
Does that help Rand Paul eventually run for president when he's got something like that on his record, that he proposed that kind of spending cuts? Would that appeal to much of the nation, do you think?
I don't think so, Brian. Unfortunately, being right on the issues is not necessarily a great resume for running for president. It doesn't work that way. The truth is that we've been spending beyond our means for decades because the American people like it. They get all kinds of free stuff, and who pays for it? The next generation. Great deal, right? That's a major flaw in democracy. The voters want all kinds of programs and all kinds of spending. They don't want to pay the bill, and they don't have to because of our ability to borrow. So I don't think we're going to stop borrowing anytime soon, I'm afraid. It's going to take higher interest rates, higher borrowing costs, or a complete political sea change for us to see the wisdom of a balanced budget.
Rand Paul also put up on Twitter recently, Rand Paul says, if you want to stop the endless wars, you actually have to lead. The U.S. guarding oil in Syria will only prolong the war and bring the Kurds into conflict with Assad. Mr. President, don't listen to Lindsey Graham and Chuck Schumer and others who have been wrong for so long.
Yeah, that's good advice, Brian. And I hope President Trump takes it, because the truth is that President Trump has indicated a desire to pull out of Syria, to pull out of Afghanistan. And he has made moves, but he has often reversed himself. And there are signs that the Pentagon and the military-industrial complex and the Washington establishment are trying to get him once again to reconsider his decision to pull out of northeastern Syria. And I agree with Rand Paul. We need to get out of Syria all the way as soon as possible. And this is a dangerous place to be. There's no vital U.S. interest at stake. The idea that we need to guard Syria's oil wells indefinitely is absurd. There are plenty of other military forces on the ground capable of doing that. As we've proven, we don't need to be occupying half of Syria to be militarily effective against ISIS when we need to be. So we just don't need to be there, and it's time to get out.
Late in getting to this day in history, but I guess better late than never. Dr. Waddy, yesterday's day in history, and I did not have an historian on yesterday. We had Hornell... Steuben County Democratic Chair Sean Hogan on, as I said in the beginning of the show. So we missed out on the Great Depression starting on October 29th, 1929.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about this last week, Brian, the huge, really sweeping historical importance of the Great Depression in setting up the conditions for not only World War II and thus the Cold War and everything that followed, but we also talked about how it set up the conditions for a humongous expansion of government that happened in the 1930s and 40s and has been happening ever since. So I think I would just repeat the fact that the trend really for the last 500 years has been for governments in the Western world to expand, and they use every crisis as an opportunity to expand. They exploit the vulnerability of the people who want help in a moment of crisis to sell them on the illusion that government is the solution to their problems. And that's a trend that's been going on for far too long, and we conservatives need to find some effective way to stop it.
Just about out of time with Alfred State History Professor Dr. Nick Waddy. Anything in this day in history I did not bring up that you wanted to cover, Nick?
Well, I thought this was kind of neat, Brian. It's the anniversary of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast. Yeah, that's pretty neat. For your viewers who aren't familiar with it, basically it was a broadcast. It was fictional. It was about a Martian invasion, and a lot of people heard it, and it sounded like a news report, and it made people panic. But it got me thinking about the fact that, before people had all this angst about social media, they were worried about television. Before people were worried about television, they were worried about the radio. And before people were worried about radio, they were worried about novels and cheap newspapers and all these forms of media. People have always worried were corrupting public morals and causing the downfall of civilization. And I'm not sure those people were entirely wrong, but the truth is that civilization is still standing. It survived. It survived radio. It survived television. It will survive Facebook and Twitter And I think we can still make a go of it, Brian.
With that, we must go. Dr. Nick Waddy, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.